You also want to provide with the PMC number. And so I'll show you in a minute where that is. But basically, it's a number that allows anybody to link to that specific article and the list. And if you've never done that before, you can actually find it on PubMed. And I'll show you that screenshot in a minute. Okay. Okay, so if you look at a PubMed, I just put in my own, the last paper we published, and so you'll see it's right down here at the bottom, and so that's how you find it if you've never made a Biosketch before. I don't usually include those in mine, but I have a CV. This is really unique to NIH, although probably just for consistency, you should do that. Okay, so once you've done that, positions and honors, pretty straightforward. Again, chronological order. And you want to focus on positions and honors that are related to your professional development. So, for example, here's some examples from NIH, from their website. As you get more senior, you're going to have to pick and choose about which one of these things that you want to include. Like, I don't include any more, well, I do professional memberships, but I have it listed just, and so that it's in like a sentence form. I am a member of the following society. Because you want to start balancing, you know, how much space you use doing particular things. If you're a member of 10 societies, using 10 lines to show that probably isn't the best use of your space. So you want to pick things, give the reviewer a sense of your commitment within a field, but you don't want to go overboard, and you don't need to include, like, if you want a community award for something unrelated to science, that wouldn't go on here. You don't typically see that. And also, it'll change a little bit over time. Like, I still have my awards from graduate school listed on my CV, but I don't list them on my Biosketch because they've been replaced with other things. So you want to be kind of find the balance between completeness and space utilization. So I typically list everything, and then at the end, go back if I need to remove things to get extra space. I do it here. I don't think this has a huge impact. Contributions to science. So of the things that you're going to put on a Biosketch, my personal opinion is that this is the most important from the standpoint of a review. Because this really says, this is your opportunity to say how impactful your research is, and if you have already submitted grants to NIH, and how novel or innovative, that's the word, not novel. Now, innovative, impactful your research is one of the criteria on which NIH grants are judged, and that's really, it's extraordinarily important, and reviewers have to specifically say, this grant is innovative in these ways. Well, you want to be able to convey some of that in your Biosketch where possible. So what you might talk about, so you have an option of up to 5 of your most significant contributions to science. Each contribution should be no longer than half a page, including citations, and you can have up to 5 papers per paragraph showing their contributions. And again, I know some of you look like you're graduate students or postdocs. The chances of having 5 unique contributions at that point is pretty low. And so, and even in junior faculty, you don't have to select up to 5. I would say select the number that best represents you without feeling like you're really stretching. But you can get creative with this. And again, this is the other part. So I would say it was section A and section C that took me 7.5 out of the 8 hours that I spent writing this Biosketch for my first one. And I am at a point in my career where I actually have several paragraphs that I substitute in and out based on So as you get more senior, you'll be modifying this a lot more. What I would say is, for this is that you really, again, you want to sell yourself, and that's really hard for people to do. For most people to do, not everybody. And I would say, particularly women, have a hard time appreciating. And I bet there are lots of people in here who thought, oh my gosh, I couldn't come up with 5 contributions if I had to. And that's the wrong attitude. You have contributions. You need to, again, step back and think about, look at your CV and think about what you've contributed in terms of your publications, and then work around that. And one of my contributions for the first chemotherapy grant I applied for, I had no papers. And so I made a contribution paragraph related to that project and said up front, I've never published on this topic, but this is what makes me think that I can make a contribution in this area. And then I talked about what my unique contribution would be in terms of background in zoology, interest in environment, and the fact that most of the people studying these questions were coming from a cancer field and were focused on molecular aspects. So the other point I want to make is, anyone can come up with a narrative about themselves. I think it's more impactful if you can provide metrics that reinforce your statement of importance. And it doesn't always have to be related to the grant. So I told you I studied in graduate school monogamy in prairie voles, which was interesting from an ecological standpoint. And really that was the context in which we studied it. We were interested in why this small percentage of mammals, 3%, are socially monogamous, and how that evolved. That was the question. What does that have to do with mammary cancer, that sort of thing? Probably not a whole lot, except for that one little link that I made. But I still spend some time talking about that aspect of my career. So my early contribution during graduate school, my thesis was on the effect of monogamy, or the social modulation of monogamy and hormones that were the mechanism that cause these animals to behave in a way that's atypical for most mammals, right? And so when I talk about that, I give a brief description, and then I talk about how it first, and so my studies linked it to stress. So these mice, or these voles, were more likely to be monogamous if it was stressful, in a stressful environment. So low food, high predator, et cetera, et cetera. So, so I talk about that, and then I talk about how I stopped doing that research as soon as like 3 years after I left that lab. As soon as I went to Johns Hopkins, I stopped all the ecology work I was doing. But that work spawned something like 50, 60 other papers in a lot of different species, talking about how corticosteroid stress hormones influence social bonding in all these different species. So I talked about that in this paragraph. So it's not closely related to what I'm studying, but what it shows is that I can pick problems that have impact over time. And you can also talk about things like citation number, or if some of your papers in that related to that paragraph got cited, talk about that. If they got selected by like faculty of 1,000, talk about that. If the editor put a little blurb out, talk about that. If another journal picked it up as an interesting fact that came out this week or anything, talk about that. Any external validation that you can pull out is, I think, really beneficial. And again, not going to be easy early in your career. It's a lot easier as you have time for things to be cited and you have time. I talk about the prairie voles. It took 20 years for those papers to come out. So this is it's a lot harder to write the more junior you are, and so don't get frustrated. There's also the opportunity to include a link to your complete biography. It says the instructions say you may provide a URL to your full list. It must be on a federal government website for reasons I just told you. My bibliography is what I use. It's what they recommend. It's really easy. Just pulls information off of PubMed. And this is exactly how I listed on my CV too. This is from the example, the NIH example. And my take on this is do it. You've got nothing to lose by linking to this. And particularly if you have any papers, even if they're not related to the grant, if you have any papers that have either come out or might come out in the next 9 months, remember the review cycle is about 9 months. And so if you get a decent score and you end up going to council and somebody clicks on your My link, papers that were published within the last 3 weeks, which is 8.5 months after you submitted your grant, are going to show up. So some program officers will let you submit information late, some won't. This is a great way of making sure that whoever's reviewing your grant is getting the latest update to your bibliography. So I say always do it. There's nothing to lose.
That's 8 minutes.
Okay, I can do it. I'm there. And so there's also the last part, which is research support and or scholastic performance. I wasn't sure that how many students would be here, so I didn't put on the scholastic performance. Really, this is for pre-doctoral applications and postdoctoral applications. So if you are a postdoc who's listed as a key personnel on an R01, you do not provide your scholastic report. That's only if you're applying for a training grant. So be clear when you look at the instructions about what you're supposed to be including. But by and large, you are listing ongoing and completing research projects that you think may draw attention. Unless they've cut somebody out there, but to the research that you're doing. So here's an example. And so what they don't want you to do is list how much money you're getting or how much effort you're putting on the grant. But so ongoing research support, it has the number, the PI, your role, the dates. A one sentence, this is the title, a one sentence goal. And then also, if you are, so my recommendation is, if you are applying for a grant, you already have a grant, you want to be clear that there's no overlap, either scientific or budgetary. So I always include a statement, this project does not have any scientific or budgetary overlap with the current proposal. So I put that in just about for any already funded or ingoing grant. And then if it is something that the title would suggest, oh, there might be overlap with the current grant, then I spend another sentence or two describing why there's no overlap. So for example, I had a chemotherapy grant that was funded that focused on mechanisms of chemotherapy in the brain in mice, so looking at molecular pathways, right? Submitting a grant, a clinical grant to look at the same thing, chemo brain in women, completely different. So we weren't looking at pathways, we were only looking at behavior within women, we obviously wouldn't be looking at the brain at all. I was very clear in the paragraph that I put underneath that there was not going to be any overlap, because even, it's one of those things where overlap isn't supposed to be part of the review. That's something that's supposed to happen administratively at NIH to decide. But anytime you put any doubt in a reviewer's mind in terms of your project, I think that it can affect the score. So you want to head off any problems up front. It's my opinion. And if you don't have any current or prior support, don't just leave it blank, because then they don't know if you just forgot this part. Just put none, and that's fine. And I think it's sometimes that works in your advantage. All right, so there is a new Biosketch resource. It's ScienceCV. I haven't used it. Again, I spent so much time. I think the filling out the forms, the easy part at the top. Really, what took my time was crafting the paragraphs, but it's there if someone give you the link if you want to try it. But I would say the take home here is to start early and get feedback. Because even if you have a good sense of what you are going to say, it takes you have such a limited amount of space and you have such a limited amount of time to convey what you need to the reviewer. You want to be certain that you're putting your best foot forward. I spend less time on this specific games than I spend on my Biosketch probably, which I know is different than some other people. But get the correct form, follow directions, always make sure that there's not something different, because it really stinks if you put together an entire grant and you suffered at the review because you didn't include something that they wanted to see in the Biosketch. So always make sure, tailor it to the grant application. As I said, 90% of it's going to stay the same, but you always want to make it clear that you have spent the time to revise it for this particular grant, and that you have thought about what any potential weaknesses are in your grant in terms of collaborators or anything. If you've never collaborated with these people before, you want to address all that up front. And sell yourself, but don't cross the line into the customers. So again, it's really hard, and this is part of the thing that took me 8 hours, is that, I'd start and I'd look at it, I'd try to figure out what my best contributions were to describe. And it is really hard to get to that point where you're saying, this was the first thing, this was the first suggestion, that this was a pathway, and then you go from there. You don't want to go too far, though. I mean, I've had people who've written, not in grant reviews, but people have written draft letters for me that say that they are the best young scientists in this entire field, and it's hard to sign something with that kind of a statement unless it's really clearly true. You don't want to put yourself in a position where you don't have the papers to back up what you're saying. So I think most people aren't going to have this. This is probably a 1% issue that's crossing the line into the absurd, but you want to be careful seriously. And in order to be taken seriously, you have to be positive, but not absurd. So anyway, that's my quick take home on how to write a good Biosketch. But I'm happy as people start applying for grants. If you want someone to read it, I can give you feedback. But you definitely want to take the time to think about how to present yourself. All right, so questions? I apologize, I got this cold going on, so my voice is so irritating and nasal. So I'm sorry.
How much time, in an NIH study section would you say people bring up your Biosketch when they're talking about the grant that you reviewed, or defending it if you don't like it or not?
Very little unless there's a weakness. So basically what happens is the reviewer, so it's one of the categories is the research team. And so then you talk about each person who submitted a Biosketch and importantly, how they are going to form a team, that complementary expertise. Make their lives easier and give them all that information up front in the Biosketch, so they can so they don't have to say, oh, look at all 4 CVs or Biosketches and say, oh, these, I can see how these fit together. Tell them how it fits together. So it's been a change in format since I first started submitting grants, where the idea was you had the introductory paragraph and then you listed just all of your papers that were, or your, and we would say like out of 85 papers, these are the 25 most important in terms of field, blah, 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 blah. I think this new format tries to get away from that so that younger investigators, I think the idea was to give younger investigators an opportunity to talk about themselves and the importance of their research without just looking, okay, this person has 25 papers versus 4. The downside of that is that I think it is harder for junior people to write these sorts of paragraphs. So when people talk about the PIs during review, it is typically that this research team doesn't have this critical expertise that's required for this grant. That's most of it. Usually they'll say, you know, this is an outstanding PI or very good PI, well suited for, you know, this research project. There's not nitty-gritty discussion of people unless there's some hole. And it's usually a hole related to expertise for the grant. And which is, you know, it's a funny thing. So, but that would probably be, so one of the biggest issues is if you don't, and it doesn't have to be the PI, but if the team doesn't have the expertise, that means that even if it's a great idea, it's going to get a low score. So that's why I spend a lot of time on the Biosketch, even though it doesn't end up typically being a huge discussion point, because if everything they need to know is there, they move on and focus on other things. And it's kind of an odd thing. It's helpful to go to a study section because it's a personal thing to get, you know, a score grade from the PIs. But a lot of times, you know, you feel like, oh, you're putting yourself out there, you're being judged. But it's mostly the PI team, and it's in the context of the project as opposed to saying, oh, this PI, you know, I'm not sure that they would be able to finish this project, or they're not that productive or anything else. There's not that level of discussion typically.
I would say one place where that changes, if it's an F award or a K award, because then the candidate gets looked at for what did they do to get them ready. It doesn't have to be.
Yeah. So training is different, and the training is absolutely.
But I also think in that personal statement, if you know there are some of those questions that might get raised, it's a place where you can craft the language that is convincing that people, it's where flattery is the greatest compliment, or well, it's where someone will say, she just answered my question there, that you can do with a little subjectivity, and then you may find those things popping up in your review.
Right.
So,
And that's it. I mean, you know, it's interesting when you talk to people who haven't been on study sections, and their frustration is, well, you know, I don't know why this person seemed to like the grant, but I don't know why they didn't argue for it. Like, you need to argue based on what's written in the grant. So, you know, if people are expecting the reviewers to understand how important it is without articulating it at different places, then you're at a disadvantage. If you know what your weaknesses are and you address them in a positive way, that's what the reviewer is going to be left with. Because the average person is reviewing 8 grants. In the study section, I'm doing it as a study section. It's more than that. I think it was 9 or so. So you know, it's a lot of time, and you want to make their job as easy as possible. Other questions, anybody?